There is a great conversation happening in the discussion forum amongst some of our intrepid grad students who are taking our grad seminar that we're, teaching together this fall.
You're disclosing that we're teaching a grad seminar through ModPo.
Secret thing.
Wonder
But
if
they're
the
really
grad office is
interested.
going to find out. Tell
But
them.
They are interested.
Tell your
in
grad
the-
director that we're doing this. Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
It's okay. They're interested in the materiality of Stein's language and how Stein actually draws our attention to the materiality of language in her poems. Specifically, they were looking at A Long Dress. And as we've talked about this a bunch already, so maybe we can just stick with A Long Dress, but the Picasso poem, the portrait.
Yeah. So materiality. I think we should probably ask Erin if she's willing just to sort of explain why would anybody think of a word as a thing, right? I mean, this is such an important topic, but it's very hard to say simply. I wondered if you would give it a try. And then I wonder, Kyle, if you would leave the seat to Magdalena. Magdalena, would you be willing to come up to the front? Okay, fantastic. And Deanna, I promise not to put you on the spot, but I wonder if you would get the mic and say something about this whole question. I know that in terms of sound, you care about the kind of materiality, so, okay. Erin, why do we even talk about materiality in poetry? It seems so non-material.
I'll just try to not say very much, because I would actually like to throw it out to either Karis or Deanna.
Okay, good. And I want to get Emily Hartnett in on this too, so remind me of that. Go ahead, Erin.
Right,
Sorry.
okay. No, so I guess just to take a little slice of it so I could throw it back at you, just the whole idea of the sonic, like looking at a words, the relation between words, the relations between sounds, the not necessarily as generators of fixed meaning, but as actual material factors that are working with each other. And I'll just throw something like, for example, even like sonically things, like I just wonder if we look at A Long Dress, for example, and it starts talking about machines, and people were talking in one of the video discussions about that poem about the construction, the fabrication by machine of clothing,
Right.
which I'm sure Gertrude Stein never had a single thing that was made by a machine.
Right.
But that's sort of beside the point. But I was thinking about another approach that wasn't mechanized in that era, and that was the an homonym for a long dress, which is a laundress, the person who actually has to wash at length the dresses that people wear. So I just thinking about materiality of words in that kind of sense.
Well, I think A Long Dress really is about the material predecessing, the material context, pretext for language getting created. What is the current that makes machinery? Well, she's not just talking about dress factory. She's talking about poem factory, And what current is current, electric current, currency, meaning the presentness, how does that get made in a machine-like way? And she and Williams and others in that early modern period were thinking, a poem is a machine. We're making something. It's productive. And that leads to the feeling that it's not just air that's being made in a poem. Anyway, Deanna, what are your thoughts on materiality?
Well, first I wanted to say I like that point about materiality also encompassing something to do with the labor of working with things too. Like, I think that's very important. And was hesitant to talk about this because I haven't actually read any of the poems.
But go for it.
Yeah, but I'd like to relate it to something maybe that I'm working on. I've been doing a lot of work on Dadaist sound poems. And so I think when I think about the materiality of language, it's sort of caught between the idea of the word as sound and the word as having meaning. And every time, there was this impulse in Dadaist sound poetry to try and break language down to its more, phonetic components so that we could escape from its sort of instrumental use. But I think the more that people tried to do that, the more they realized that, even if you break a word down into a phoneme or a sound or a breath or something, it always, there's no sort of limit case as to where signification ends and where sound begins.
Yeah.
So I think that's also, quite visible in Gertrude Stein's poems too, that we fluctuate between hearing them for what they mean, but also hearing them sonically, as you were saying before.
Yeah. Emily Hartnett. Hi. Is Emily there?
Hear me?
Hi, Emily.
Can't quite
Have-
hear you. I think I can now.
Are
But
you, are you?
one
Did
of
you
the-
hear what? Did you hear what we've been saying?
I did. I
Yeah.
did.
Here's my. Let me just sort of translate where I think we're going with this and get your response. I'm really interested in your response. I mean, all writing should have these qualities, but poetry is the genre. Sorry to use that word, but I don't have another one. You know, poetry is the category, the kind of writing where we think about these things. But it's true of all writing, right? That you know that that sounding word is not it's not going to be. We're not going to limit things. It's always going to be open. Anyway, your thoughts.
Yeah, when I think about language as material, I guess I think about it more as language as artifactual in some way or historical. When I think about Gertrude Stein's poems, how they anticipate things we talk about later in the course, one of the perfect sites for seeing how what we think of as language is functional or correct language, and meaning itself is dependent on politics and the people who, right, I'm a teacher now, who teach the rules of grammar and teach definite meanings or constellate the range of possible meanings. So that language is a product of its time, an object of its time, the way anything you encounter in a museum would, in some way, and that's something I'm always thinking about. And then materiality too as sound, and I think it's helpful too to think of the materiality of language because it reminds you that language in that spoken capacity is something which emerges from actual bodies and actual human beings in contact with one another.
Right.
And the more abstract we treat language, the more we kind of erase that social context and also erase the intimacy which language encodes.
That's so great, Emily. Thank you. And you put me in mind of Susan Howe considering Stein and Dickinson together in My Emily Dickinson when she says, "Who polices questions of grammar?"
Definitely
Right?
something I'm
And
thinking of.
the consequences of that policing are bodily, not just, oh, I had my poem suppressed. Right? That's a very political thing. And boy, did they go after Gertrude Stein, especially in the 1950s, calling her insane. I mean, it was just the attacks on Gertrude Stein were brutal.
In the 50s.
In the 50s, also in the 30s as well. But in the 50s, it was renewed because there was so much pressure to do more conventional things. And Stanzas in Meditation came out, and that was crazy. And, the attacks on Gertrude Stein were so brutal. And you wonder, what's the motivation here? Well, who polices questions of grammar? It goes back to the basic thing, like, we need to make sure that English stays exactly the way it is, all that stuff. That conservative impulse becomes anti-modernist, anti-poetic, anti-Stein, and it has real consequences. Yeah.